Yeah, you're live.
Not me, but okay. We'll go ahead and get started. So it's just a little bit after 6:30 and everybody's time. So thank you everybody for coming. You're here. If you're here, hopefully you were here for the Utah Go user group. It's on April 1st. I have blessedly had very few garbage things today, and our talk is a real talk today. There are no tricks in this in case you keep waiting for some sort of.
Well,
Okay. Oh, never mind. I shouldn't speak for AJ. I was really tempted to have it be AI talk, but you come here and AI is entirely different than artificial intelligence, but I don't even care that much. So we're not doing that. So let's get started. Real quick warning. These boxes with the little green lights above your heads are the microphones for this room. They're very, very good. So the recording probably gets you whispering, but if there's anybody that's joined in the stream online, they probably will hear any whispers. Okay, so even so just as a heads up, all the mics we use that we record this are pretty good, and so even if you're whispering, might get caught. So be careful to only whisper nice things. If you want to speak here and continue on our trend, you can submit it to this paper call link. You can also just come talk to me after the meetup or hit meetup. I'm Carson or Carsonoid on Slack. Or you can just post to the Go channel on Slack and say, hey, I'd like to speak. Who do I talk to? If you don't want to remember any names, and people will get you to the right place. I would love to have more people come here and speak and continue our trend of talking about all of the packages from the GoStdlib. We're still just scratching the surface. There are some really fun packages, even basic packages like FOMT and HTTP and a bunch of these other like fundamental things you probably use every day that even if you use it every day, I guarantee you there's stuff in the standard lib that you haven't used. And I just like to keep kind of this whole series of talks about all the great stuff that you just get with Go. There's no framework you have to add. There's no other dependencies you have to install. I want to just talk about the neat things that you get out of the box when you install Go. Including things like the flag package, which we're talking about today. I think we have one on, I can't remember what the next one is. We do have a bunch queued up. There's also a canvas in the Go Slack channel that is kind of illustrating all of the different packages that you could talk about, and we're marking them off and giving credit to people talking about those. So if you want to talk about anything in the GoStdlib, talk to me. We can tell you what's available and then get you hooked up with that. Also looking for other kind of, it still says 2024. That's where I'm living. Anything else that's kind of more down to earth. I'm not afraid of, or I don't want to completely avoid like more nuanced or complicated. You know, there are two reasons you come to these meetups. One, because you don't know Go at all, and the other, because you know Go a lot. And I'm trying to still lean towards not the beginner, but something that is not like you have to have already had 5 years in Go to understand the thing, which is why we're leaning on standard lib so much, is everybody can learn something about standard lib. Enough about that. I will point out, we'll do two things here. Normally I just talk about how there is a jobs channel and there's a hiring channel on the Slack. But we also have somebody here that's asked to kind of stand up and talk about a couple of actual, job opportunities that he wanted to mention outside of the Slack. I'm sure, are they posted on the Slack or?
They are posted on Slack.
Okay.
Well, one is, yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I'll give you a couple minutes if you want to get people hired as Go developers. That's always a good use of this platform.
Okay. Stand here.
Yeah, that's fine. We don't care about it in the recording.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, get your stand up and the audio will come through.
Yeah, I'm Rodney Smith, and the company I work for has 5 open Go engineer jobs for senior and principal. We are building a backend for our system. We are building a delivery network for 3D Gaussian splat delivery for AR, VR devices for Hollywood studios. And so we are pioneering the format of Gaussian splats versus 3D point meshes or polygons because they're more compressible. So we're hiring for our web services team, and whether it be or that content processing, that's all what we're hiring for. So there's a job listed on Slack. Awesome. So ping me or contact me at virus.com.
Sweet. Well, that's great. That's good to see.
Miris, MIRIS.com.
Yeah, there you go. So always love having like five different Go opportunities at different levels, sounds like. So if you want to develop Go professionally, and who wouldn't, there's an opportunity for you. That's it. That's all I have for housekeeping. I'm going to go ahead and hand over to AJ, and he's going to cover the flag package in the standard lib, which is something that I think people avoid and try to override with other libraries that are more complicated unnecessarily.
I only use the flag package. I never use CLI libraries.
What happens if I plug into this? Does all hell break loose, or is it?
No, you'll get power, and I think it'll try to share the screen on different input that we're not presenting on.
Oh, so I don't want to do that then?
You can plug in if you want.
Oh,
Just
as
have
long
to.
as you just mirror, it's fine. Benefit only is power.
Will you just let me know what we need to do here? Tell me if this is working.
Full screen, yeah.
Well, that's not working, so I need to share on the other thing.
You have to share in Meet, yeah.
Must share and meet
Must share.
regardless. Okay.
There it is.
All right, so I have not done a dry run of these slides yet. So if something comes out formatted funky, we're just going to deal with it. That said, there's some good material in here. The alternate title for this presentation is You Might Not Need Cobra. In fact, I can tell you assertively, you don't need Cobra. The primary title for this would be Go Flags and Flags, because we're also going to talk about flags. I'm AJ. Most of you, or at least many of you, I don't want to say most, many of you know me. And I'm a deep learner and a dangerous wrong thinker. I am also a gun for hire. I do myself a little bit of Go, and my newest thing is I actually just completed the Proxmox training. So if anybody is interested in saving some money, Proxmox is basically the tool that allows you to do that with co-location. And I just started the Utah Colo meetup. So if you're interested in that, or if you're more on the home lab side of things, feel free to join. Okay, and we'll be on with it. So this is what flags look like. Oh, and sorry, I just realized that I stopped my video. Let me turn that back on. I don't know if that's sharing too, but let's pretend like it is. Oh yeah, it is. Okay, so this is what flags look like. When we say flags, this is typically what we mean. So it's something that starts with a hyphen, sometimes starts with a double dash, sometimes has an equals, and sometimes has an argument to it. And we're done. No. So this is the typical format that Go will parse flags in. It'll handle any of those cases, with a special case for the Boolean, because you can only use the equals with the Boolean, where you can do =1 or =0 or equals true or equals false, or you can just do the flat, but you cannot pass true to a Boolean, but you can do the flag equals style to give it T or F or true or false or 0 or 1. So before we dive into Go, as is my way of being that I always do at the Go meetups, let's talk about something that's not Go at all first. So a long time ago in a shell far, far away, or rather near and dear to us, there is POSIX. And POSIX, I think where many people get confused about how flags work is not at the level of the parser that we have in Go or any other language. It's actually at the level of the shell. So we're going to go over that a bit so that we can know how the shell treats it first. And then I'll come back around to this just later that has a bunch of, if you're struggling with what to name your flag, there are certain sins you shouldn't commit and certain things you should abide by because I say so. And there's a list here that we'll go back to at the end if we have time. All right, so POSIX strings. So first of all, when you're in a shell, strings behave differently than perhaps you would expect. So you'll see things that look unquoted that are just expressions. They're commands that you type in, flags, arguments, whatever, data. Then there are literal strings, and then there are quoted strings. And these behave differently, sometimes in ways you wouldn't expect. So I'd like to take a minute for us to go over that. The first thing to know is that arguments, flags, all of the things that get passed into a command for it to have the name of itself and the things that it's supposed to operate on are white space delimited. And it doesn't matter how much white space there is. It doesn't matter if it's tabs. It doesn't matter if it's spaces. I'm not sure how most programs handle vertical tabs, but you probably didn't know that was a thing. So we're all good there. And new lines are what end the line so that it then gets interpreted. So here, if we do, and I actually, except that I'm sharing the window and not the screen, so I guess I'll describe this because I was going to actually pull this up. So if you do echo foo bar baz, can anyone hazard a guess what you get back?
Space bar, space pass.
Foo, space bar, space baz. Yes, that's correct. So you'll get back one space in between. Now, what if we do echo foo bar baz, but we have many spaces in between them? Does anybody know what we get back? We get back the same as the first. The spaces are eaten up because space is the delimiter. And then in the final one here, hopefully this one isn't too much of a trick. If we encapsulate the whole thing in single quotes, then what do we get? We get exactly what's in the single quotes comes back. And tangential note, GitHub Actions adds Windows new lines to things when you paste them in by hand. So if you've ever done a multi-line environment variable in GitHub Actions and you're wondering why doesn't this work? If you debug it with single quotes around it, you will find that you got a Windows /R thrown in the mix of the /n, even though the Mac that you're on and the JavaScript that you're running on that Mac in the browser only use /n for new lines. So string literals are very much like Go's backtick strings. So as who here has used the backtick string in Go? Okay, about half of you. All right. So for those of you that don't know, it is very, very literal. There is no escaping. Everything that comes after it is treated exactly as it is. I don't know if there's some exception for that for non-Unicode byte sequences. I don't know if you could just put random garbage in there, but I do know that what is there, as far as what you can type on a keyboard, new lines, spaces, quotes, backslashes, there's no escapes. It captures exactly what you put. That is the same way that string literals work in the shell. So if you have a $sign inside of a string literal, that's a single quote, then you just get a $sign. If you think that you're going to escape the string literal so that you can continue on with a string literal, you will be sadly mistaken because you cannot. Escape sequences don't count inside of a string literal. Everything is literal. Likewise, new lines and such inside of a string literal are just new lines and such. Then we have string expressions. Now, string expressions, they basically handle sequences and $signs and brackets and a bunch of other things to give a few things that you might be familiar with. Now, if I echo foo, and you can see with the syntax highlighting as well, thank goodness the syntax highlighter worked. If you put $sign foo, that is now being interpolated. It is now being evaluated as an expression because it begins with a $sign. There are a few things that inside of double quotes are that way. And then also, if I wanted to create a timestamp file name, for example, boom, put a string, then put the $sign, then I put parentheses, and now I have a subshell. So it's actually almost identical to as if I was running this set of commands from its own file and just bringing that in. So I'm running in a subshell there. And you'll notice that inside I have single quotes. What I should have done here is actually put in the double quotes, because inside of an expression, every time you nest with another type of shell expression, you get another layer of quotes that you can have. So if I had put double quotes here rather than single quotes inside of this $ parentheses, that would actually be valid. It would come in up to that. No, because this is a subshell.
Because you're already kind of, it knows the context because the parens.
Yeah, so the parens start a subshell. So you're actually executing a different script.
Crazy.
So you're executing one script. When it reaches the subshell, it's now executing another script, and things like variable scope change inside of that. So if we want to understand the difference between a string expression versus an expression, this is a very poignant example, and it looks contrived, but I've actually had to do this on purpose a number of times in various scripts. So the first one has double quotes on the outside of the shell expression, and then on the inside it has single quotes. So it seems like it's kind of useless to do this. Why would I echo and echo? And in the first case, that actually it is useless. It's a no-op. It's doing the exact same thing. So both the inner echo and the outer echo are actually echoing the same thing. The inner echo is echoing with extra spaces, and the outer echo will receive that. It's quoted, and it's going to put it out with the extra spaces. On the next line, however, it actually, the expression, because it's not in double quotes, is expanded and replaced in place almost like a template. So by the time echo on the second line gets to evaluate that result, it is just seeing the string spaces, foo, bar, baz, with all the spaces in between. And so what it will output is foo, single space, bar, single space, baz. So again, the reason that I believe that this is important to know is because when it seems like you can't get your parser to work correctly, a lot of times it's the old garbage in, garbage out. So it's really important to understand how the shell works. And I'm talking about POSIX shell. There are some variances between, say, ZSH, fish. ZSH is mostly POSIX. Fish does not even try to be POSIX. And depending on, like, let's say you're nesting inside of YAML or inside of JSON, then you end up with cases where you have to double escape something, etc. So when you're in that YAML config file, it is important to know that when you're using the pipe operator, I believe that everything that comes after the pipe will be exactly what executes in the shell. But if you're not using that pipe operator, there are cases where the interpolation is happening at that stage. So, and I'm not even going to go over all of this because, as you can see, there's a lot of stuff there. But the point here is just there's a lot of different special characters, and if you just type stuff out on the keyboard in the shell, different things that you might not expect can happen. For example, the curly braces are actually an output grouping mechanism. So you put curly braces around a bunch of commands, direct that all to a single file, and that will capture all of standard out, but not standard error. You can get it to capture standard error as well. This is actually an interesting one. If you have a command with arguments, I use this all the time for sudo in my scripts to see if I detect is sudo there or not. I put sudo into a variable command underscore sudo, or curl as well. Like I'll have curl with some default options like a timeout setting and some other things, TLS option, whatever. And then I'll capture that in a variable command curl. And when you use that as execution, like you see right there, what that will do is it will expand out just like a template, and it will execute that with arguments. If you were, however, to put the quotes around it, then you would get an error. So we won't go much deeper than that in terms of the shell, because although I am trying to get you into the shell, I know that you're here for Go. So just a quick pop quiz. Whoever can tell me what that outputs gets this little tchotchke. All right, you got 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Nobody knows? Come on, it's obvious. That's what it was gonna put out. So if you want to review that later, it was just a bunch of convoluted nested strings, escapes, strings next to strings. Another thing is that if you, with the white space delimiting, if you put a join character like a quote mark in between white space, you can make it look like you're quoting something, but actually it has no effect and everything just gets joined together. So anyway, okay. But this is the real problem. Is this valid or not? Why?
They're all just separated into individual. So those extra quotes don't matter.
Yep. So even the command itself, in this case, echo, which is actually not a command, but a shell built in, but we'll call it a command. Even the command echo, if we put quotes around it, that's just fine because the parser.
That if your command had a space in it, you had a file, binary file that had a space in the file name, the only way you could invoke, well, or backscaping, right? But
There's a special place in hell for those people.
I'm just saying, you have to when you're quoting.
No, that's true. That's true. I ran up against a case. Has anybody ever had to deal with Windows domains on a Mac? You've worked somewhere, they give you a Mac, but you're on a Windows domain. All sorts of fun things happen when you run shell scripts. Like, you know, I don't know how many projects have had to do bug fixes over that, but I've imagined, you know, things like Rust Up or the Ruby installer, Brew. I imagine they've all had their run-ins with Windows domains and paths. Yeah. Anyway, okay, cool. So that's all about the expressions. Okay, that's all. These are the different types of strings. This is what they can mean. This is kind of how it can be evaluated. Now let's talk more specifically about flags, because flags are kind of POSIX-y and kind of convention-y. POSIX flags, in truth, are only with a single dash and a single letter. That is the POSIX flag. GNU came in and introduced the idea of the long opt and the long flag with the double dash. So just a little bit of history. POSIX is the single dash. GNU adds the double dash. For all intents and purposes, for the love of all that is sacred, please support both in your programs, which Go does by default, not in the way that I would like, but it does. And it's certainly workable and readable and not too much to complain about. So a flag is all arguments that begin with a hyphen until the first argument that doesn't begin with a hyphen or the double hyphen. It's important to note that the double hyphen, everything before, we were talking about the shell, what the shell does. Now we're talking about what a POSIX or GNU program does, because there's the GitOps, GitFlags libraries that are in those programs. So the double dash is the escape character, so that when it encounters that, we'll see that in just a minute. So we'll move along. Okay. So again, a similar example to earlier. We've got a flag and 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 an arg and a flag and a flag. And well, I guess technically that's an option. So when we look at this thing's actually called an option. So this is called a flag. And then this combined is called an option, or a flag and its argument, or an option and its argument. And then this one arg. This one here, or sorry, this one, even though I called it arg, it's actually a flag. That was just to trick you up and it tripped me up. But then this one, if we have the double dash, in most programs, including Go programs, the double dash is a delimiter for arguments, and the next thing that comes after that will be treated as an argument rather than a flag. And we'll see a case for that in just a moment. So what happens if you need to escape a flag? Everybody's done this, right? You touch a file name and you accidentally put like the -p or the -rf or one of the other file command things. And so you end up creating a file called -rf, and then you go to remove it and you feel very afraid. Well, there's two things that you can do in that situation. Because it's a file path, you could actually put // in front of it. But for the purposes of our demonstration here, RM, as with most POSIX and GNU utilities, knows that when it sees the double dash, the next thing is going to be an argument. And so now it will treat -rf as an argument of a file name to delete rather than a flag of how to behave. So that comes in handy.
Never done that.
You haven't lived.
Clearly, I've never lived.
I've been in that exact scenario and I just go, where's that graphical file browser? Anything up with that, like.
All right. So now, yes?
So in the previous example, could you have used single quotes around -rf?
No, no, I'm so glad you asked because I almost put that in here and then I didn't. And now I know I should have. Because if you put quotes around it, quotes are evaluating up at the shell layer. When we get to argument parsing, we're down into the actual code layer now. So the shell is parsing quotes. And then by the time it gets to a command like RM doesn't know what your original string looked like because the shell is parsing that, putting it into an array, putting it on the stack, and then putting it into that runtime for the program. So I'm so glad you asked.
It would probably work with ./-rf. So if you fully qualified a relative path,
Yes.
then it wouldn't look like an argument. But
Yes.
the quotes disappear before it makes it into the actual program.
The // does work. Oops. Okay. So now onto this other style of options, which Go supports as well. So here we've got our command, we've said this before. You know, you've got a flag and then you have an option. You can call this whole thing, you can call this parent option, or you can say the flag and its option, or the flag and its argument, or the option and its argument. All of those are good enough for now because I haven't dug in technically deep enough to find someone that's really willing to debate it with a clear answer. But I'd love to find that person in that forum and be involved. And then the same thing here. So you've got the equals. And I like supporting this generally, and Go supports this. However, there's a caveat. The caveat is, and I imagine just about everybody has run up against this as well, you have some program, you pass your option, and it does what you expect it to do with something that is evaluated at the level of the shell. So generally speaking, globs, meaning your asterisks, your tilde for your home directory, and in some cases there are other characters that can act as that. Those get evaluated at the shell, except that they also get evaluated at the command level. So for example, if you're using Git and you have a symlink in the local directory and you do a git add, then Git will, or you do a git add star, then Git will complain that you have a symlink in that directory. If on the other hand, you put single quotes around it, then the star will be preserved rather than expanded. And then when Git processes it, it will ignore symlinks. So in one case, you get an error, in the other case, you don't. So this is a little bit of nuance because sometimes the behavior, you don't know why it works or doesn't work. Because sometimes the program, like if you're using a program that I wrote, then this is going to work for you. But if you use a program that someone else wrote, it might not.
Sounds like felt right.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I ran into this, I don't even know if it's the same thing or not. Something very similar with doing flags in my Go stuff. So I added a Boolean flag. And it was the Boolean flag was literally called Twitch mode. And so if I did Twitch mode and then if I did ran my main and I did -- Twitch mode with a space and then I put false, it didn't evaluate, but it did with the equal sign.
Yes, so that is Go.
If that's a Go thing or this what you were talking about there.
This is a Go thing, but
Okay.
it is what I'm talking about here in that different programs have different choices to make of what user experience they want to create. So with Go, booleans can have an equals, but they can't have an argument.
Yeah, because if I just had left it as Twitch mode without the false, it would evaluate it as true. I just had to, okay, cool.
Does that have something to do with the zero value? That feels like some sort of concession they'd make due to zero values.
No, it's because generally a Boolean flag, you set it to be on. So you set it to be on or not. The reason that you would use a Boolean value equals true or a Boolean value equals false would be for documentation. So that the person reading knows this is a common option that you might want to turn on or off.
Yes,
As opposed to providing two examples, you provide one example with the equals.
wrong, by defaulting it to false. Like I should be, I'm defaulting it to true, it should default to false, and then the flag should just be turn on, essentially. Right, adding the flag sets it to true
Yeah.
as opposed to ever setting it to false.
Well, and I think
So I'm doing it wrong.
I don't know about
on
the default
purpose.
flag library, but some of the other third-party ones do things like generate like --no
Yes.
variants of flags for you. and
Yes.
work around some of these things.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah. So anyway, my point with this is that things like asterisks or tilde sometimes will, if you do it like this, they're guaranteed to expand at the shell level. If it's white space delimited, the shell will be the thing expanding it. If it's not white space delimited and it happens to work, it's because the program had logic in it or the parsing library had logic in it to handle that case. That can be true on Windows just as well as Linux. Go utilities run on Windows and they handle the tilde the way that they're supposed to. All right. And then arguments again. So the first argument after the double dash or that's not preceded by an option flag is also considered an argument. So at the level of the shell, everything is an argument. Everything that's white space delimited is an argument. The shell doesn't know anything about flags. It doesn't know anything about any of that. It's just looking at white spaces, either single quotes or double quotes, and then dollar signs and brackets for certain types of expressions. When you get down into your program code, this is where the term argument applies only to the things that come traditionally after the flag. So BSD style, for example, on Mac, you cannot do the same. GNU and BSD are different in this regard. On Mac, BSD, you have to do rm-rf and then give a path name. You may have seen in Linux circles that it is preferred to do rm path name and then -rf. BSD style is more strict and that flags and options must come before arguments. And GNU style is more lax and that you can typically mix things wonka-donk any which way. And then if you ever do anything in Node,
Do it in.
all right, now we finally get into the 3 minutes that we need to spend on GoFlag because it is really, really simple. So for those of you that have not seen it before because you've used more complicated packages that have drenched your soul in filth, this is how simple using GoFlag is. So there it is. I don't like the way that they did this, but I understand. They made a global. There's a global instance of the flag struct that is exported at the package level. This is fairly common. This does cause some problems though. I'll talk about that in a minute. But you just do flag.string or flag.bool or flag.int or flag. Whatever it is. We'll look at the list in a minute. And then you give it the name that you want to be presented in the help, what you want the default value to be, and then the comment that you want in the help. Then you call flag.parse, and the variables that are returned in this format are pointers. This is absolutely stupid. Please don't do this. Okay.
It is though.
So rule number one, after I was about to introduce the no pointer rule, rule number one is there are no rules. You are not constrained to have to use a flag package. You can do very simple things all on your own. For example, every program that I write has this snippet or one that's similar to it in it. So what I'm doing here is I'm checking to see of the shell arguments, what the shell believed were arguments, that's os.args, because they have not been parsed yet by a command line parser in the program. What the shell gave me as arguments, do I have more than one of them? Because you'll always have one, caveat, weird cases that we don't need to talk about that sometimes happen in C and embedded code. But you'll always have at least one argument, which will be the name of the program. Oh, and also hacksaws, that too. Hacksaws sometimes, but anyway. So you always have one argument that's the name of the program. And if you have another argument, then it might be a flag or an option or an argument. And so what I always do at the pretty much near the top of my program is I check to see, is it -V? This is the POSIX standard for version, -V. Lowercase v is for verbose. Don't do it. Capital V is for version, capital V. Or -- version or version. And actually I would probably, well, I don't need to put in the single dash version in here because that's going to get caught later on in the program anyway. But I always have a print version function, and then I just check to see if that's that, because I want BSD style / POSIX style to work, which is the -V. I want GNU style to work, which is the -- version, and I want Go and Rust and Zig style to work, which is the subcommand version. Yes.
What would happen if you added flags with that? Would that ruin your offset, or does this flag package?
So this happens before you do flag parsing.
Okay, that was, okay, thank you.
That's how I do it. I do it before I do the flag parsing.
Yeah, that's fine. I just,
If you parse the flags, it doesn't modify OS args.
yes, that's what I was thought. I was just, anyway, I was thinking,
It reads wrong.
you answered my question perfectly, either way.
So that's rule number one, is there are no rules. You get to do what you want. Just try to follow some conventions. Yes, sir.
Is it just a stylistic choice to not use the flags package to do this? Because
The flags package doesn't do this.
oh, okay.
It's
Because the flags package doesn't have a way to do short arguments. So the flags package does not have, and thank heavens, because for example, in Swift, the flags package equivalent in Swift, they have a bunch of baked in logic, and then they have like these weird hooks to try to get around it to put in custom logic, but it won't work for either version or help. So they have this escape hatch to go in and do something special. But if the special thing you want to do is version or help, you can't do it. Go is much more flexible, and that if you want to use an escape hatch like this, you just use it, you're fine. But also it doesn't have any knobs to twiddle. You're going to use it the way it's prescribed, or you're not. And if you're not, you're going to handle it with a custom function, and it doesn't pick sides. Other than that, I believe -- help is built in by default, but it doesn't preclude you from defining -- help. Whereas in the Swift library, it does. So anyway, did that answer the question? Okay. All right. So let's see. Do I want to take a look at those right now? Yeah, let's do it. All right. So I'm going to open up a couple of things here. They didn't open up. Let me try that again. Oh, they did open up, but worked the way it was expected. Actually, no. We'll take a look at that in a minute. We'll go on. I've only got 2 slides left here. All right. So rule number 2 is avoid pointers. So I just find that it's cumbersome to work with, and it leads to human error. It gets caught with the type checker 99.9% of the time, except that a pointer is also an end. So there's some cases where something slips through the cracks. But for the most part, it's complicated. It just makes it weird. And then you have to have 2 variables. You have to have like a verbose PTR and then verbose, or email PTR and then email, or you end up, or email stir, or you end up doing something that just feels kind of nasty. So I prefer to just always use the var version of the flag. So bool var, string var, int var, etc. Declare those all up top and then just pass them in. And then oftentimes, unless it's a simple little ditty, which a lot of things I do are simple little ditties, you have a config struct. And so then you just pass in the pointer to that property of the config struct and load it up that way. So I just find that to be, it's a little bit more typing, but the ergonomics of it I find to be much better. So put that out. And then rule number 3 is, oh, we got some bad indentation here. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to show my bad indents.
Okay, it fixes it at compile time.
Control S. Either will remove your white space here.
So we'll just pretend like this was spaces instead of tabs there. But the thing that I wanted to show off here is that you can create your own flag set. The main flag set is you give it no name, and then other flag sets you give them a name, and we'll look at those resources for why it's useful. But I recommend doing this in production, let's say, because there's lots of times, and I can't think of one off the top of my head, but there are times when it's, and maybe we only need to handle it in those cases, but there's times when you're trying to kind of have like take some pieces from this thing and put it over there, or test particular behavior. And you don't want your program to fail when you parse the flags. Like, again, it's difficult to describe because I can't think of it off the top of my head. I just know that I've encountered it. It was probably bad design on my part in the first place. I don't know. But this solves that problem. If you create a flag set, then you can choose to set continue on error, which is kind of a weird name. I wish that they would have called it return error, because that's what happens. So with the default flag package, when you call parse, if there's an error, it exits with an error code and prints out the help message along with potentially an error message. This replicates that same behavior, but just now I'm in control of it. So if I wanted to, heaven forbid that I wanted to replace something in that string, like let's say that there was actually, you've probably had this case before. You know something about the user's config because of the way that you're reading environment variables or something like that. And you might actually want to take the help that they get out, and then maybe you have a little template variable in your help, and you're just going to render the help with that replaced with something that you know about the user's setup, so that the help is even more helpful rather than being really generic. It's more focused. But then, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't articulate the general problem of why I find this useful. And maybe that's a case that I'm just wrong, that this is not good advice. But I like this pattern. I like this pattern of doing a flag set and then calling parse on it, checking the error, printing it out.
The trick with the global flags, if you just do flag.string, there's flag.string var. When you parse all of the flags that any package that is imported, you've imported or they've imported down the entire dependency chain. All of those flags, like you might get flags from other packages. Because if they have an init that defines a flag, it will get pulled in with yours, and you might try to define a flag. If you ever had the error of like flag already defined, like because you've imported something that has already registered that same flag. Whereas the only things in this flag set are the things that you've put in that flag set because there's no global state.
Yes. And that comes up with the case, I think, of subcommands in particular. But yes.
Well, I mean, flag sets are used heavily for subcommands in general, so.
Yes. See, I think, yeah, so we got 2 more things here. So I'm going to take a pause and move on to some examples to show you from, if I can get this to go here. So our good friends at Your Basic Go. Actually, we've already done the equivalent of this example, so there's no use in me really showing that. Never mind, we'll move right along. Go by example command line flags. This just shows some more examples of the different types of flags that you have.
And the pointer garbage.
And different what?
Did they show you the pointer garbage, how you have to dereference your whole point is how in those print statements, how they have to dereference the pointer in the print.
Yeah.
And you were saying if you defined it ahead of time, you wouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, and they show that here.
Yeah,
As well,
I'm agreeing
same
with,
pattern.
I'm agreeing with you that it's stupid.
Yeah. I'm just also pointing out that they
100%, yes.
show that here
Yeah.
as well. So Go by Example is just a wonderful site. Your Basic and Go by Example are both wonderful sites. They have really, really good examples. So I just wanted to show this to you that it's there so you can kind of see if you kind of forgot where to find these slides. I did post them in the Slack and in the message channel, but you know, if you want something you can quickly Google to see examples and refresh your memory of how things works. This is really, really condensed. And if I'd just gone from this instead of my slides, we would have probably spent half as much time on this. So it's really great. And then the flag package is wonderful. It's just very large. And so it can be a little bit daunting to look at it and kind of consider every possible thing you can do and try to pick out like, okay, what are the important ones I need to know? Because there are both functions that are types like bool, var. Duration is an interesting one. You don't get in most flag packages. I like that one. But then there's func, which is a utility function as well as visit and lookup and a few others. So when you need to figure out something specific, you ask an LLM. And then you refer to the documentation to interpret what the LLM said as truth or not truth.
Agreed.
So go back to the example. I think there's something really intriguing in this one.
Which one?
Scroll down, if you wouldn't mind, the go by example.
Oh, Go by Example.
Yeah. And if you scroll down to where they go through some of the iterations, I think the one that really trips people up is this one that's second from the bottom right now. Word equals opt. No, the one below that. Right. People kind of expect, and certain Cobra, as an example, systems, like this kind of line is interpreted radically different by different programs, right?
Yes.
Like I know programs that will say word word equals opt is a flag to the root command. Then I'm going to call the A1, A2, A3 subcommands, right? And they like require your flags to be in order. I kind of like the simplicity of Go's like,
Yes.
it's very POSIX, right? It's your POSIX rules. Like the first thing I saw that didn't start with a dash is everything after that. You don't need to put a double dash. That dash num is not then it's not a flag.
Yeah. If we didn't have to worry about this case and one other case, you could write an arguments parser in about 15 lines. And if you write your programs really simply, I thought about putting those 15 lines in the slides. I now regret that I didn't. But there's basically 3 functions you can have. I call it check flag, take flag, take opt, and take arg. Actually, I just call it take arg because the way that it actually works, it doesn't matter whether it's an option or an argument. But anyway, it basically, it's just that case of the RM-RF where you have to have the double dash. And then as soon as you have to have the double dash, you actually have to have an intelligent parser because you have to read up to that point and you have to know that the flags were defined ahead of time. But if you write a simple program and you know that there's not going to be the RM-RF case for it, you can basically write 15 lines of code and handle perfectly every possible valid case for your program. You don't get the benefit of the types on it necessarily, but you can work around that too. Anyway, the flag package is great. So one last thing that I wanted to go over. Sorry, any other comments or questions or thoughts? Okay, so the one last thing that I wanted to go over here, and then I'm going to scroll back a little bit to something from earlier. But rather than creating my own examples, I just want to take a look at Go by Example. So one of the reasons that people use things like Cobra is because they don't know about new flag set, or they feel in their heart of hearts that new flag set just doesn't meet their needs. And I'll grant you that if you are creating very hierarchical command sets, you're doing it wrong. But your feelings are valid and you might use Cobra even though you should just make your program simpler or split it into multiple programs. But anyway, so you can create new flag sets and you can give them names, and then you can switch on the arguments and then have a default case where you put out help. This is really great when you only have a limited set of subcommands. If you've got 3 or 4 subcommands, you can do this. If you're going to have 15 or 100 subcommands and you need to aggregate their help, again, I think perhaps consider writing a simpler program. Flat is better than nested, and do one thing and do it well. But there are, I'm sure, some realistic cases where that's really, really valid. And doing this is not good enough and you want to reach out for something else. So that's where you hit the limit of GoFlag, is when you are doing multiple levels of subcommands, or you have really, really, really big list of subcommand, because what you end up doing is you'll have to write a generator that will, I mean, you'll be writing the function that is the dot bool function, but you'll be writing it for your subcommands and then generating your help and yada, yada. So this is also a case though, where you could do a little trick. You could still use the flag package. You could just take your first argument, add a dash in front of it, run it through the flag set. Then you could take the output and remove the leading dash in front of it. Kind of hacky, but it will automatically build your help for you. Just not at multiple layers. Okay. So with that out of the way, let's see. Oh yeah, okay, one more thing and then we'll go back a little bit. So if I can get this, all right, we got that one and then this one. So one other thing that comes up useful from time to time, I have a few different strategies for dealing with default options. So my rule is that environment variables are implicit, flags are explicit. So environment variables never trump flags. And the reason is very simple. When you go to debug and you look to see what was this command called with, and you see a flag, that flag better be the thing that's the way it's behaving, because what you don't see when you look up how that was run is what your environment variables are. You'll get to the point where you check your environment variables, but the first thing you're going to do is say, oh, did I pass something wrong? Did I use the wrong option, the wrong flag? And so that's why environment variables are overridden by flags. However, we want environment variables to be able to provide the default. And one of the ways that I do this is some stuff that I don't like the way that it looks. It looks a little more verbose. I do these checks and I have default value, say default verbose, and then verbose, that doesn't make sense. Default name, and then name, and the default name comes from the environment variable if it's set, but if it's not set, then it's the example name, and then, I do that thing, and then sometimes I check, is it the example name? If it's the example name, then it, blah, blah, blah. So I don't always like the way that looks. That's one way to go about it. The other way to go about it is the visit function. So flag.visit only visits things that were actually defined. So if you're trying to figure out, in the case of your Boolean flag, where you have the
Right, built it wrong, but yeah, default's true, and I want to set it to false.
yeah, but this actually will help you with that,
Yes.
right? So you can look at a value and you can find out, is it an empty string because the user set it to an empty string and the empty string has meaning? Or is it that the user didn't provide it, so I want to give the default value? And one of the cases I've come up against with that is, okay, I had a config directory where you can specify a profile. So it is valid to have the .profile be the directory. If you wanted it to be that, you would do -- profile equals empty string. So in that case, .profile is the profile directory. But if you do -- profile equals Bob, then it's going to do Bob.profile. And if you don't pass anything, it's going to be default.profile. So edge case, nuance, but these things do come up from time to time where you need to identify the difference between the user passed false or the user didn't pass true, because the behavior is slightly different. One of the cases where that comes up would be, sometimes there's things with security where you want to say, if the user passed false for validate token, then you want to ignore validation. But if they didn't pass it, you want to validate it with, say, default parameters, leeway of 60 seconds on either side. But if you do, validate true, then it's strict validation. It's got to be to the second, and it's got to have the HTTPS:// in front. It can't just be the domain name or whatever. Like there's cases where you want false to mean ignore something and you want true to mean something else. So again, I don't have a good example of that off the top of my head, which is probably an indicator that when we do it, it's probably a code smell, but it comes up sometimes, just like having multi-layer subcommands. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with your last point here. If you're inventing a ternary Boolean, probably a bad idea.
Probably is.
There are valid use cases for it, but you probably don't have one.
I agree.
We're in agreement.
I agree. Yep. I apologize that I taught you something that you can use to shoot yourself in the foot.
They find it themselves, it's fine.
They do it at tail scale, so.
You know it's bad.
The best companies do.
That's not what I was saying. I'm just like, no, they do.
So if we're gonna audit or like report all different things where they were set from, let's say we were gonna do analytics or we were gonna look at how our developers or somebody was gonna use the flags to see which ones are implicit, which ones are they setting environment variables for. What is the most concise way or the best way in Go? Now, to preface this, I have been learning Go for about 2.5 weeks.
All right. So I think that that's a general question, not a Go question, but I'm going to rephrase that in case, well, you say the mics are excellent, so maybe I don't need to.
Still good for the room.
Okay, so for
ears are worse than mics, so.
Okay, so for the room then, so the question is, if you want an audit trail of here's the configuration and here's where it came from. This came from the environment variable, this came from the config file, this came from the flag. How do you print that out or audit it or present it in a way that's auditable so that you can know? And the answer is that's a bespoke solution for a bespoke problem. However, if you'd like to see an example of how I tackled it, there's a utility that I wrote that is called Serviceman. And you can find it on webinstall.dev/serviceman. It is for system launchers. So it works with systemd, it works with OpenRC, it works with launch control. There is the previous version of it works with Windows. And if you're on Windows, you're going to get the previous version when you install it. And I just went full explicit on it because this is the stuff that makes people tear their hair out. When a system launcher isn't working correctly, ambiguity is the last thing that you want. So with that tool, because it fits a niche where ambiguity is the death of you, I have it print out line by line every config option that it's chosen, how it constructed the command line argument that it runs, where the file that it templates out is, and then it has some sort of indicator as to whether that was the default or whether it was chosen because of the operating system, or it was chosen because of the system launcher, or it was chosen because of a user setting, or it was chosen because one setting implied another setting. That makes it sound like it's more complicated than it is, because that sounds like there's thousands of permutations. If you actually use it, I think it's quite a bit simpler. But for those of you that use Lambda because you're too afraid to figure out how to write a systemd unit file, Serviceman is your guy. So since that came up, I'll just show that real quick.
Yeah, where was that at?
Webinstall.dev/serviceman. If you just search serviceman, it's probably one of the top terms now. Let me see if I just search for it. Serviceman. What if I do serviceman? If I do serviceman Webby, it's definitely going to come up as the top. But anyway, so this is the tool. I took great care in writing this. I actually originally wrote it in Go, and I rewrote it in POSIX shell. Why would I do a crazy thing like that? That's awesome.
Love POSIX shell.
There are reasons. One of them is the security audits. People feel more comfortable when they can see the script rather than having a binary. Having a 4 megabyte binary to template a 1 kilobyte text file also feels a little off for a lot of sysadmins. But anyway, I won't go more into that. I'll talk about that some other time. If we can have a presentation on why I chose to use the POSIX shell instead of. But there's also things, because I'm dealing with pretty Linux specific things, using the shell was kind of natural. There were some things that were hairy, but all in all, it worked out. Anyway, so that's how to know that a flag was set. And then I think there was just one last thing that I wanted to cover, which was back at the very beginning. I told you how you can become a good person that I love. And that is by following the guidelines that I have established here. Now, there are guidelines I've established because there's not actually a real standard for these things. There's just conventions that have permeated the ages. However, in some places, there are IEEE and POSIX standards for these. So I think I referenced the sources, but yeah, I referenced some of the sources for that. So this is an IEEE thing because it's from the POSIX standard. This is GNU stuff, and this is also GNU stuff. But when you are considering a command line flags and options, I would appreciate it for the love of all humanity if you would consider looking at a chart like this to see if what you're doing has something that has already been done before many, many times across the Unix and Linux ecosystem. So, for example, -A is almost all. A lot of people don't know that. Throw it in any program, and you might be any program that has the ability to show, any program that supports -A for all typically will support -A for almost all. And what it will do is, in the case of LS, for example, remove hidden files. In other programs, it does other things. There are some things that are, of course, overloaded, but C, D, E, F is common for fixed strings, meaning don't evaluate this as an expression or a template internally. So for example, the case that I mentioned earlier with Git, I don't know if Git supports -F, but that would be a case where if you didn't want Git to try to expand something that it thought was a glob as a glob, if you wanted to name a file star, that's the kind of thing you would use. V is also used for invert match in a few different programs. So I want to search for everything but this. H, human readable, I, input. K is one that's a little interesting because I is used for input. So K is used for insecure. It's just, iterating on the next letter of the alphabet type stuff. Huh? What?
H-I-J-K, wouldn't J be the next letter in the alphabet?
Oh, sorry. J was used for something else. I don't remember what.
Okay.
But yeah, so K is insecure. And then let's see, are there any other ones that are interesting? Oh, -F is also used for classify in the case of LS, for example. -I is typically ignore. Yeah, and then like this one is one that gets me, the -W and double dash right, because you see this in all sorts of programs, from Prettier to the Caddy formatter to lots of different things.
No, it's -O, I'm sorry. Not dash right.
Oh, no, go funks. There's two.
Here's the -W for go.
Yeah. So anyway, it's kind of funny that there's a lot of commands that will create something that's slightly different, like -- right out or -- right to, and it just gets confusing. So obviously there's lots of different programs, there's lots of different use cases. I'm just saying, when you're sitting there and you're just typing something out and you think that it's something only you're going to use, but then next month it gets picked up by Hacker News and now it's a default part of the tech stack, just in case, just consider, just like ask GPT or something. It'll probably be wrong because I ask it stuff like this all the time and it just spits out nonsense. But if you can, obviously, if you can keep it in line with particularly the BSD commands and the GNU commands, then I honestly believe that does the world a favor. There's some conventions that Node doesn't follow. I mean, in particular, I mentioned Node earlier, like Node and NPM have a whole bunch of flags that don't mean what they're supposed to mean, and like the parsing isn't correct and the double dash doesn't work right, and so the stuff becomes popular or it gets part of production, and then and then it becomes challenging to deal with. So I just ask kindly that, you know, take a look, consider it when you are creating your options flags, because probably there's something out there that already did that. Okay, so how are we at for time? Are we about at the end of it? All
You're
right.
way ahead of Carson's.
Anything I've ever done.
We gave a 3-hour talk. It's pretty infamous.
Never let me figure it.
And it hasn't been as dense as Carson either.
That's true. That's a compliment or not. Thank you.
What's the flags package? Like,
All right, well,
we did a dense flags package, all things considered. You have
in that case, well, all right, now we'll just skip to Q&A then.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, you can do your end slide if you want real quick.
Theme.
That's not what it says.
I speak French, it's fine.
So I host meetups, and so I never get the claps. I have to clap for myself for people to start because
we were waiting for the question again.
Waiting for you to shut up for a second so we clap.
now I ruined it. I didn't even feel a high five.
You had one job.
I did it, guys. Okay.
So I noticed in a lot of your examples, you're doing the flag parsing in main, and I've also seen a lot of code where it does the flag parsing in init. I'm assuming that you have strong feelings about that. I know I want to hear that.
I think that in general, the best people agree. I just watched Mary Poppins at a high school the other night. So that's where the best people is coming from, because that was repeated throughout the play. The best people agree you don't use init. So init is just, you know, it's hidden behavior. It's something that causes head scratches. Create a capital I init function or an initme function and call it from main. And I know that the Go authors put it there. I imagine that it's one of the things that they regret. Or I guess there's probably some cases where it needs to be used because they've chosen to do global packages, and there's some places where probably memory needs to be initialized or something needs to happen that's at a global scope that we generally would agree you shouldn't do, but they did. And it hasn't caused too many problems yet.
I think it's argument, and I like your way much better. Not the use of init doesn't bother me. If you're going to use flags with init, it means you have to put the flag values into a global variable, like a package variable, and then they leak throughout your entire package, right? Like they make their way into functions all over the place, and your flag parsing, and it becomes unclear when functions depend on flag parsing having happened. So putting it in main.
So you obviously have experience with some of the things that I was alluding to that I was like, I can't think of a good example right now.
Essentially, it's an orchestration thing, right? So when you have things run in main, you can define, you know when it's going to be called and defined, right? Like this will be defined before the next thing needs it. With init, those technically, you lose the control of when that's run.
They run in parallel.
You run in parallel, they run unordered.
I'm just saying, you no longer can say, yes, this is defined, therefore.
Well, the
I
only
can act
scope
on
and
it.
it can assign things to is package.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's no other function scope it can be scoped into. It has to live
Yeah.
package, which is, I can't say it. I hate the default client. I hate http.get being a thing that just works. Like it was not worth the shorthand that they gave it. Like it just wasn't worth it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing though. I mean, you know that there's these trade-offs, and I think a lot of it is readme envy, right? Everybody wants to have a readme that shows how to do something extremely complex that should take 5 or 6 lines, but they want to show it in just 1 line. Look what you can do in just 1 line. Look what the defaults do in just 1 line. And then nobody knows how to access.
And then you don't know how to run it in production.
Anyway, yes, start.
For a concrete example of where global flags are a problem, the test, the open source database is aggressively trying to rip out global flags because things got imported, they were set at global scope within it. And so every binary has every flag for every package, every binary.
Disgusting.
And obviously that's not super useful when you're doing a help. It's like, Well, some of these actually work here, but most of them probably don't. That's,
This is also similar to another problem I've raised. You know, you can do go mod init multiple places in your repository. Like you can do go mod init all over.
Yeah, maybe we
And-
shouldn't.
And there's
I think that's a different talk.
well, yeah, sure. But the Git tags are now handled correctly so that you can have things versioned properly with sub packages within your package, and you can do go mod init. And where that helps is that if you must do a mono repo, and I do believe that there are a limited number of cases, probably not that anybody at a company in this room has, except maybe one that Todd worked at once. But that you would actually need to keep everything in a mono repo, but actually have the modules separate. And then you don't get, the problem I have is the tests. Tests, because they include the whole world. Like you use Goose, which is great, but before Goose was popular, it was, what is it called? Migrator? Migrator was one of the original
I don't
SQL.
know. I didn't work before Goose existed.
Oh, okay, all right. So Migrator was one of the OG Migrator packages,
Probably.
but its tests include the world. It is the NPM of Go. It includes the Azure libraries, the AWS libraries, the Mongo libraries, and then everything that they depend on and all of their different databases. So like you want to use SQLite, and if you do go mod vendor, you're going to get 3 gigabytes, including like, I don't know, probably something that's wrapping Ruby's active record. I mean, it's insane. So anyway, that's an aside, but yeah. Any other questions, comments, thoughts, smart remarks?
I mean,
I roasted you, you can roast me.
one thing that I keep thinking about, or that I kept coming to mind as you were going through the various ways that arguments are handled and when the flags stop, was some of the amazing FFmpeg commands that I have seen over the years.
Yes,
They do something special.
yes. FFmpeg is an example of, I don't know that they use a package, and their arguments are probably Turing complete, but also probably not deterministic. Yeah. Yeah, that's. Anybody ever used FFmpeg with,
Their command line arguments are a programming language unto itself.
yeah. Yeah, it's like all for video. Oh, but you can also pass it in files, like files as part of your arguments that have arguments in the files. It does do magical things though, like HLS, so.
I want to go, this is unrelated, but you mentioned. So multiple modules in the same Git repository and tags, version tags, you can actually tag the different modules
Yeah,
in
you
different
can.
versions.
You
How,
can- You could tag them at the module level here.
how?
So you give it the name of the module, so your repo is your root, so your, github.com/thing. And then you would, the one that's in the root, when you git clone that, the one that's in the root would be where you git modded it, the thing. But in the subdirectories, you can git mod init those, and when you do git tag, it's very intuitive. It's just the name of that package, then the version.
Oh, so your
File in-
tags must be nice and prefixed with
Yeah.
like the directory that they apply to.
Yeah.
Okay, that,
And you would have to have the module file, the GoMod file in the,
in that same
in that
directory.
module itself, yes.
Well, so as an aside, we have a giant repo full of all of our generated
Yeah,
talk code. Right, so we got protos and we generate all this Go code from it, and we put it all, we have it all in one big library of here's like every proto file service that's been generated in their own directories. And we've often wanted to like slim that down to like, what if you could just pull down not everybody's code, but like just yours, and multiple modules has come up, but we've always avoided it for versioning reasons, but.
Yeah, the versioning was introduced fairly recently, within the last 2 years, I want to say. Does anybody
I thought it was 121.
know that for certain? When? 21?
I think so.
Okay, yeah, so
That is.
I didn't discover it.
Go versions every 6 months.
I didn't discover it until this year, and I had complained about it in years prior. Also, the Go Tools stuff, that's so awesome. Oh, it takes them decades, but man, they eventually get it right. It's like, you can't say that about any other programming language. What other programming language do people complain about things for decades? And then when they implement it correctly. Go is unique. I don't know if it's always worth the wait.
They very rarely add stuff that you later say, like, why do they even bother, right? Like,
Go Tools was just to include the. Weird.
Yeah,
There's full into the mock file too, right? So like,
Yeah,
it's more than just the tool. If it's in the mock file, it's.
well, then the compiler runs it.
anyway,
Oh. Clap again.
clap again.
Yeah, clap again.